Okay, first of all, apologies for the poor quality. I'm in a motel room and I want to talk to you briefly about The Godfather. It came out in 1969 and it was a smashing success. Up to that point, it was the best ever selling hardcover novel that had ever been published. 8 million copies in a very short amount of time. The reasons are many. The topic obviously attracted great interest. It is a good piece of pulp fiction, reads very easily, and there are a lot of other reasons connected to that. One of the reasons is the fact that when it came out in 1969, the United States was going through one of the darkest period of its history. Nixon had just been elected president. The Vietnam War was raging at full speed with hundreds of casualties every day reported on live color TV, demonstrations all over the country, but most of all, the previous year in 1968, there were two of the most tragic events of the century. In April, it was the murder of Martin Luther King, and in June, the murder of Robert Kennedy, who was going to be the Democratic nominee to the presidential election. Needless to say, well, you know that Robert Kennedy was the younger brother of JFK. In this situation of extreme tension and complete disillusionment with the establishment, with the so-called government, at the time it was called the establishment, people were not inclined to believing any official truth. They were actually inclined to believing the opposite, that everything was corrupt and that there was, if not a gigantic conspiracy per se, but that there was an establishment that was rotten at the core. And they were looking at the evidence, particularly in the civil rights movement that reached its peak in 1964-65. The long struggle for equal rights and for civil rights, for basic civil rights, and the enormous resistance, the blood, and everything that it entailed to achieve this result made people strongly believe that the system itself was corrupt. And they started looking at alternatives, and they started believing that the only way out was to separate themselves completely from the system, from what was going on. So there was a flourishing on communes in California, for instance, but also in upstate New York. People were looking at religious alternatives. A lot of new churches flourished in that period, and they were clannish. They were communities that tried to be self-sustained. There was a strong movement, a self-support movement, that in all of the marginalized communities in America, the women's movement had its root in the civil rights movement. The gay movement, 1968, 67 actually, the Stonewall's riot. We just had the 50th anniversary recently celebrated. The American Indian movement, again, that tried to start reclaiming some of the land that had been stolen from them. Even the handicapped, the lesser able or diversely able people started protesting. And not everyone, but there was really a tendency to see and to seek alternative solutions to what was perceived as an inefficient, corrupt, and corrupting system. So when The Godfather comes out, yes, it is about crime family. It is about thugs and hoodlums and despicable individuals who, for the pursuit of personal power and wealth, commit all sort of horrendous crimes. But at the core, what people perceived was a society that had its own rules, a society that administered its own rules, and a society that lived within an extremely corrupt society. And the opening, the first chapter, the very first episode that is recounted, is the story of Buonasera, who goes to the godfather and asks for justice. There is a sense that the society, the large system, the establishment, is not interested in providing justice. And the evidence obviously was in the recent history of the civil rights and so forth. It's a kind of a circular argument, but it's very important that the very first pages of the book hit on the nail on the head. What was at the core of the resistance and the rebellion at the time was the search and the need for justice. And I'll give another little short lecture later. Let's see if this one worked.